Ethan knew the fence was real because it had been built to make people stop asking questions. It ran through the trees in a straight, ugly line of galvanized steel and razor ribbon, disappearing into the black timber on either side, with red warning placards bolted every 20 yards to the posts. Federal Recherted Ara. No entry. D. Adley, Fornschweither Ized under curtain conditions. The language was deliberately vague, but the hardware wasn't. Ethan stood in the rain beneath the branches of an enormous Douglas fir and watched water bead along the wire while Maya crouched beside the post, cutting the last loop of an old maintenance cable that had been added after the original fence had gone up. Neither of them spoke. They had been standing there for nearly 4 minutes, listening, not for ghosts, not for wolves, not for anything supernatural. They were listening for engines, aircraft, generators, human voices, movement on the opposite side of the barrier. There was nothing, only rain tapping needles, the distant hiss of wind along the ridge, and the slow dripping of water from branch to branch. Ethan checked his watch. 6:17 p.m. Civil twilight had already started to drain from the forest, and the weather forecast had been wrong by enough to make him uncomfortable. The mapping project was supposed to be simple. They were contracted to verify a contour anomaly on an old survey map, a ridge inside Black Ridge Wilderness that appeared to have been omitted from several public data sets. The private client wanted coordinates and terrain photographs, nothing more. They had planned the route for weeks, calculated their extraction window, carried satellite communicators, 2 GPS units each, a thermal monocular, a compact drone, medical equipment, emergency bivvy shelters, climbing webbing, water filters, bare spray knives, headlamps, spare batteries, and enough calories for 72 hours. Ethan had spent 11 years in search and rescue before leaving the service, and Maya had taught wilderness survival in Washington and British Columbia for almost a decade. They weren't tourists. They weren't thrill seekers. They had gone through every available map, every closure notice, every publicly accessible satellite image. They knew exactly what they were doing. What they did not know was why the government had spent so much money keeping people away from a piece of forest that officially contained nothing more dangerous than steep terrain and unstable rock. Maya finished cutting the cable and eased the loose section of fence inward. 3 minutes, she whispered. Ethan nodded. No lights until we're under canopy. They slipped through one at a time. Maya went first, stepping over the lower wire and turning sideways to keep her pack from snagging. Ethan followed, pulling the fence gently back into place. He secured the cable with a temporary clamp that would make the breach difficult to notice from a distance, but would release under pressure. Their plan was to return before dawn and restore it completely. That was the plan. At the time, neither of them understood how quickly the forest would make plans irrelevant. Inside the restricted zone, the atmosphere changed almost immediately. The trees were older, closer together, and unnaturally quiet beneath the heavy canopy. Public trails existed only on the outer perimeter, and the interior had been left alone for decades. Fallen trunks lay across the ground in layers, some so old they'd become part of the soil, others freshly broken and pale beneath the bark. Ferns rose waist-high in places, moss-covered rocks, roots, and the remains of old trees. The ground descended sharply for the first 100 yards, then rose toward the ridge. Ethan moved with his compass in hand, checking it against the GPS every few minutes. Maya followed 10 yards behind, never directly in his footsteps. They had established that protocol because of terrain hazards, not because of an imagined stalker. 2 people walking the same line could trigger the same unstable branch or hidden hole. 10 yards gave them separation without sacrificing communication. At 6:31, they reached the first waypoint. Ethan planted a small orange survey marker beneath a tree and photographed it. Maya recorded the coordinate. 800 meters to the ridge, she whispered. Ethan looked upward through the canopy. Maybe. You don't believe the map. I don't believe anything with a contour interval that old. She smiled faintly. That's the Ethan I remember. He almost smiled back, but something in the forest made him stop. There was no sound. That was the problem. The rain had weakened. The wind had shifted. The forest should have been making more noise, not less. He raised one hand. Maya froze. They waited. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Nothing. Ethan slowly lowered his hand. Probably deer. Maya didn't ask why he said that. She knew it was a placeholder explanation. They continued. The ridge took longer than expected. At 7004, they reached a narrow shelf overlooking a ravine, and Ethan immediately understood the map error. The contour line didn't represent a ridge at all. It represented the top edge of a steep basin whose far side rose almost vertically. The actual ridge was beyond it. Their planned route would require either descending 300 feet into the ravine and climbing the opposite side, or circling north for almost 2 miles. Darkness was coming fast. Ethan checked the time. 7008. We stop here, Maya said. Agreed. They had no reason to take unnecessary risks after dark. They selected a campsite on the shelf, 20 feet from a massive fallen cedar, whose root ball created a natural windbreak. They cleared the ground without disturbing the surrounding vegetation more than necessary, laid their sleeping pads, erected a low-profile tarp, and suspended their food bag. They did not build a fire. Firelight would make them visible from a distance, and neither needed heat badly enough to justify it. Their headlamps remained on red mode. Maya prepared a small stove inside the windbreak while Ethan performed a perimeter check. He moved in a slow circle, scanning the ground for animal tracks, unstable roots, holes, branches, and signs of recent human activity. That was when he found the first trail marker. It was not where he had left it. Ethan crouched beside the tree. The orange marker was wedged into a crack between 2 roots. He stared at it. He remembered placing it on the opposite side of the trunk, at shoulder height, because the GPS coordinate had been difficult to acquire, and he wanted the photograph to show both marker and terrain. Now it was almost 4 feet lower and facing away from their original approach. He stood. Maya. She looked over. What? Come here. She joined him. He pointed. Her expression changed. Did you move it? Her expression changed. Did you move it? No. Wind? Ethan shook his head. The marker was protected by the trunk. It hadn't fallen. Someone had physically removed it and repositioned it. Maya crouched and inspected the ground. Any tracks? Nothing obvious. She looked toward the trees. Maybe it came loose. Ethan didn't answer. They went back to camp and checked their second marker. It was also gone. The third was 20 yards downhill. The fourth was missing. The fifth was leaning against a rock that neither of them remembered seeing. Could be animals, Maya said. Animals don't pull stakes. Raccoons. Not this high. Someone could have been in here before us. Someone would have left tracks. Not necessarily. Ethan looked at her. You're right. They finished dinner in silence. At 8:20, Ethan sent a status ping through the satellite communicator. Nothing happened. He tried again. The device displayed searching. Maya checked hers. Same result. Topographic dead zone? She asked. Probably. We knew there was one. Not this large. He moved to the edge of the shelf, raised the communicator, waited 30 seconds, then returned. No signal. Their GPS unit still worked, but GPS was not communication. Their phones were useless. The forest swallowed radio signals, and the surrounding terrain created a natural bowl around them. They could walk toward the ridge at first light and regain contact. That was reasonable. Nothing about the situation required panic. At 8:37, they performed their final perimeter sweep. Ethan carried the thermal monocular. Maya carried a compact flashlight and a fixed blade knife. They moved in opposite directions, each covering the other's blind side. The rain had stopped completely. Clouds blocked the moon. The darkness between the trees was absolute. Ethan had spent enough nights in wilderness to know that darkness was not simply the absence of light. It changed distance. Trees became walls. Open ground became pits. A branch 10 feet away could appear to be an animal. A rock 30 yards away could look like a person. The human brain hated uncertainty and filled empty space with patterns. That was why he trusted instruments more than instincts. At 9:11, he scanned the far slope with thermal. Deer appeared as small, warm smudges between the trees. A raccoon moved along a fallen log. A cluster of birds slept in a cedar. Nothing unusual. He lowered the monocular. He had taken 3 steps when Maya's voice came through the headset. "Ethan, go. Come to me. Location. South side. 40 yards. He moved immediately. When he reached her, she pointed toward the ground. Their 5th marker had been moved again. It now lay in the middle of the trail leading downhill. Not beside it. In the trail. "I didn't touch it," Maya said. "I know. Someone wants us to follow it." Ethan looked into the ravine. The trail descended through trees so tightly packed that it almost seemed impossible to pass. "Then we don't," agreed. They backed away. Ethan marked the location on GPS and photographed the marker. Then he saw something else. A thin line crossed the trail at ankle height. It was nearly invisible in the dark. He lowered his thermal monocular. The line itself wasn't visible on thermal, but the small metal anchor attached to it was. He froze. "Don't move." Maya stopped instantly. Ethan crouched. "Tripwire." She looked down. "Where?" 3 inches left of your boot." She slowly shifted her weight backward. Ethan followed the line with his light, keeping the beam low. It ran into the brush and disappeared beneath a moss-covered log. Could be an old snare. Could be. He examined the anchor. It was fresh. The metal had almost no corrosion. The wire had been recently tensioned. He cut it with his multi-tool and left the components in place. Then they withdrew 10 yards and studied the area from a safer angle. There were more lines, one at knee height, another across a narrow gap between 2 trees, another buried beneath leaves. None were random. They formed a corridor. "Someone built this," Maya said. Ethan nodded. "Recently." "So we're not alone." "No." He looked uphill, and they knew where we would walk. The implication sat between them. Their trail markers had been moved not by accident, but to direct them toward the trap corridor. Someone had been watching them. Someone had entered their campsite area without being detected. Someone had enough knowledge of the terrain to manipulate their route. They returned to camp without speaking. Neither wanted to admit how vulnerable the tarp now felt. It was not a shelter. It was a rectangle of fabric under an open sky. Ethan checked the perimeter twice more and found nothing. No footprints. No branches broken recently. No heat signatures. No sound. At 10:26, Maya whispered, "Maybe we should leave." Ethan looked at the black trees. "Where?" "Back to the fence." 2 hours in darkness if we retrace exactly. "That's better than staying here. Not if the person who moved those markers expects us to retreat." Maya considered it. "Then we stay." Ethan nodded. Until dawn, they established a defensive protocol. No sleeping simultaneously. 30-minute watches. No white light unless necessary. Packs remained packed. Boots stayed on. GPS units remained active. Knives were accessible. Their thermal monocular would be passed between watches. They would not chase sounds or investigate movement. If they heard someone, they would not call out. If they saw a person, they would create distance rather than confrontation. If attacked, they would retreat toward open terrain, not deeper into the forest. These were simple rules, but rules mattered when fear began to distort judgment. Ethan took the first watch. Maya lay beneath the tarp with her eyes closed. At 11,003, the forest made a sound. 3 sharp knocks. Ethan raised the thermal. Nothing. 2 more knocks. He scanned left to right. Nothing. The sound came again, farther away. It could have been a branch falling. It could have been wood being struck. It could have been a tree contracting as the temperature dropped. He didn't move. 5 minutes passed. Then he heard a faint scrape behind him. Ethan turned slowly. Nothing. He checked thermal. Nothing. He remained still. At 11:19, Maya whispered, "I can hear you breathing." Ethan almost laughed. "You're awake." "Yes." "Go back to sleep." "Can't." He didn't blame her. At 11:42, the rain began again, very lightly. At 11:57, Ethan heard something moving through the brush beyond the fallen cedar. It was slow, deliberate, not the quick, irregular movement of an animal. He raised the thermal monocular. The screen filled with dark branches and cold ground. Then a shape appeared, human, approximately 30 yards away. Ethan's finger tightened around the monocular. The figure was crouched behind a tree. Heat signature clear. Head, shoulders, arms. It remained motionless. Ethan lowered the monocular for 1 second and raised it again. The figure was gone. He scanned the entire area. Nothing. He whispered Maya's name. She sat upright instantly. What? Movement. Where? 30 yards east. She took the thermal. Show me. Ethan pointed. She scanned. Nothing. Maybe it moved. It did. How fast? I don't know. They waited. No sound. Then Maya said, "There." She pointed upward. Ethan took the thermal back. At first he saw nothing. Then the shape emerged. It was above them, 20 feet up, not on a branch. Standing behind a trunk where the slope rose sharply. Human heat signature, completely motionless. Ethan's mind rejected the image before he understood why. The figure was too still. It wasn't crouched. It wasn't leaning. It appeared to be standing upright in the darkness, watching them from the trees. He counted the thermal shape's dimensions. Adult, tall, thin, maybe 6 feet. It wore something insulating. The head was covered. No visible skin. Maya whispered, "That's a person." Ethan nodded. "Yes." 20 feet? Approximately. Ethan nodded. "Yes. 20 feet? Approximately." How did they get there? Don't know. The figure didn't move. Ethan slowly lowered the monocular. "We're leaving." "Now?" "Yes." Maya packed the tarp in less than a minute. Ethan watched the tree line. When he raised the thermal again, the figure was gone. "Move," he whispered. They took the opposite route from the ravine, heading north toward the original fence. Ethan chose the path using terrain rather than the markers. They stayed close enough to communicate, but far enough apart to avoid both triggering a trap. Every step was deliberate. Every route was checked. Every branch was tested. The forest seemed to have become a machine designed to punish movement. At 12:14, they reached a narrow drainage channel. Ethan stopped. Something was wrong. There were footprints in the mud. Human. Barely visible beneath the rain. They were fresh. The prints ran parallel to their route. Maya crouched. Boots? No. She touched the edge of one impression without entering it. Barefoot. Ethan stared at the print. The toes were long and spread. Could be old. Rain would have softened it. Could be old. Rain would have softened it. How old? Minutes. Neither spoke. They backed away. Ethan changed direction east. The drainage channel was no longer an option. They climbed a slope toward a cluster of enormous trees. Halfway up, Ethan heard a metallic click. He froze. Maya froze. A thin branch snapped behind them. Then another. Ethan slowly looked down. His boot had depressed something beneath the leaves, a pressure plate. He lifted his foot only a fraction of an inch. "Don't move," he whispered. Maya's eyes went to the ground. "What is it?" "Trap." "Pressure?" "Looks like it." Ethan examined the mechanism without shifting his weight. A buried metal plate connected to a cable. The cable disappeared downhill. He couldn't see the trigger. He kept his boot exactly where it was. "Can you disarm it?" Maya whispered. "Maybe. Maybe isn't good." "I know." He took a slow breath. His training had taught him that panic made the body move before the brain decided to move. He controlled his breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He studied the mechanism. It was crude but effective. A pressure plate linked to a tension system. The cable might activate a snare, a blade, a falling object, or something worse. The important thing was that the mechanism was directional. Maya. Yes. Back away from me along your exact footprints. She did. Keep the light off. She moved 3 feet, then 5. Ethan waited until she reached a stable patch. Now take out the climbing webbing. She did. He slowly pulled his knife. I'm going to distribute my weight. How? Webbing under the boot. He fed a loop of webbing beneath his heel with a knife tip, creating a sling. Maya understood immediately. If he could transfer his weight from the pressure plate to the webbing without releasing the trigger, he could potentially escape. The problem was that the plate might already be mechanically locked. He worked for nearly 6 minutes. Sweat ran down his back despite the cold. Finally, he felt the pressure change. He shifted 1 ounce of weight. Nothing happened. Another ounce. Nothing. He continued. When his heel came free, the plate rose. Nothing happened. The cable remained still. He moved his foot backward. The mechanism clicked. Both of them froze. Somewhere downhill, something struck a tree with tremendous force. A heavy object swung through the darkness and slammed into a trunk. Ethan heard the impact echo through the ravine. It was not a gunshot, it was a log trap. A suspended timber had been released. The trap had been designed to kill someone standing exactly where Ethan had been. Maya stared at him. "We go back," she whispered. "No." Ethan looked toward the ridge. Forward. They continued uphill. At 12:47, the forest opened slightly. Ethan recognized the terrain from satellite imagery. If they crossed the ridge, they could reach a rocky outcrop and possibly get a signal. They climbed faster. The rain stopped. Fog moved between the trees. The moon appeared for a moment, turning the forest silver, and Ethan saw something hanging from a branch ahead. It looked like a piece of cloth. He raised his light. It was an old jacket, human-sized, dark with age. Its sleeves had been tied together. Something was inside. Maya stepped closer, then stopped. "Don't." Ethan scanned with thermal. The jacket was cold. Whatever had been inside it was gone. He moved around it. On the trunk behind the jacket, someone had carved a line of symbols. Not words, just vertical marks. Dozens of them. Some were old enough to have grown over with bark. Others were fresh. Maya whispered, "Those aren't trail signs." "No, they're counts." Ethan looked again. Could be. Counts of what? He didn't answer. They climbed. At 1003, they reached the rocky outcrop. Ethan raised the satellite communicator. Searching. Then, for half a second, 1 bar appeared. "Signal," Maya whispered. Ethan activated the emergency beacon. The screen displayed transmitting. A confirmation tone sounded. They stared at each other. "We have contact," Maya said. Ethan didn't celebrate. He watched the screen. The signal disappeared. Did it send? I don't know. He tried again. Nothing. Then Maya looked over his shoulder. "Ethan." He followed her gaze. On the far side of the outcrop, 40 yards away, stood a man. This time, there was no thermal confusion. He was visible in the moonlight. Tall, extremely thin. His hair was long and gray. His clothing looked assembled from military surplus and animal hides. His face was pale and weathered. He held no obvious weapon. He simply stood there, watching them. Ethan immediately stepped backward and raised his hand, signaling Maya not to move. The man did not speak. Ethan considered the situation. If he was a hermit, he could be mentally unstable. If he was an armed trespasser, confrontation could be fatal. If he had built the traps, he had already demonstrated a willingness to kill. Ethan slowly moved his left hand toward the radio. The man smiled, not broadly, just enough to show he had understood the gesture. Then he pointed behind him. Ethan did not turn. He watched the man's eyes. The man's finger remained extended. Maya whispered, "What's behind us?" Ethan said nothing. The man pointed again. Then he disappeared behind the trees. Ethan waited. 10 seconds. 20. "We move," he said. They backed toward the opposite edge of the outcrop. Maya glanced behind them. Nothing. Ethan scanned thermal. Nothing. Then he saw it. A thin line of warm air rising from a crack in the rock. He crouched. There was a hidden opening beneath a shelf of stone. The heat came from below. "Cave," Maya whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Not natural." They moved around the rock and found a narrow entrance concealed beneath branches and moss. The opening was barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Fresh mud surrounded it. A boot print led inside. Then another. Maya looked at Ethan. "Underground." He nodded. "We don't go in." The sound came from the forest behind them. One slow knock, then another. Then another. Ethan raised the thermal. The man appeared on the screen at the edge of the trees. He wasn't approaching. He was waiting. Ethan suddenly understood the purpose of the traps. They weren't meant to keep trespassers out. They were meant to control where trespassers went. The markers, the snares, the false trails, the hidden trenches, the underground passage. The entire sector had been engineered into a hunting ground, and they had been walking through it exactly as the hunter intended. Maya whispered, "He's driving us." Ethan nodded toward the entrance. "Why?" Before Ethan could answer, the ground beneath Maya's left foot collapsed. She dropped with a strangled gasp, one leg plunging into darkness. Ethan lunged and caught her harness before she disappeared. The earth gave way beneath him too. He slammed onto his stomach, digging his fingers into the rock. Maya hung below him in a narrow shaft. "Don't pull," she whispered. "Something's around my leg." Ethan looked down. A loop of cable had tightened around her boot. Below her was darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. "Maya, stay still." "I am." Ethan clipped the climbing webbing to an anchor point and wrapped the other end around his wrist. He began lowering himself enough to reach her. The shaft was not a natural hole. The walls were reinforced with timber. Someone had dug it. "Ethan, I'm here. There's something down here." "What?" "I can smell it." He paused. A smell rose from the shaft. Damp earth, rust, rot, and something else. Something unmistakably organic. "Don't look down," Maya whispered. Ethan looked anyway. His headlamp finally caught the bottom. There were bones. Animal bones. Human bones. Some were old. Some were not. He felt Maya's body tense. "Get me out. I will." He reached her boot and cut the cable. The tension released. Maya grabbed the webbing. Ethan pulled. They climbed together. At the edge of the shaft, a sound came from the forest. Footsteps, slow, unhurried, coming toward them. Ethan hauled Maya onto solid ground. They rolled away from the opening. The footsteps stopped. The man was somewhere beyond the trees. Ethan raised the thermal. Nothing. He scanned again. Nothing. Then he saw a faint heat signature beneath the ground. Not one, several. Moving. Maya stared at the display. "Ethan, I see them." The heat signatures were traveling beneath their feet. A network of tunnels. The man hadn't been standing in the forest at all. He had been underground, moving through the earth beneath them. And as Ethan watched, one of the signatures stopped directly beneath them. A metallic scraping sound rose from the ground. Something was opening. Ethan grabbed Maya's arm. They ran. They crossed the outcrop and plunged into the trees, abandoning every protocol except one: create distance. Behind them, the ground shifted. A concealed hatch opened in the darkness. Ethan didn't look back. He knew the man was coming. He could hear breathing now. Not close, not yet, but moving steadily through the forest. They reached the slope above the ravine. Ethan stopped at the edge. The drop was too steep. "We can't go down," Maya said. "We don't have to." He pointed toward a narrow ledge along the cliff. There. They moved sideways. The ledge was barely 2 feet wide. One mistake meant to fall. Ethan went first, testing every foothold. Maya followed. Halfway across, a light appeared behind them. Not a flashlight. A small red glow. Someone had activated a signal lamp in the trees. Ethan turned. The man stood on the outcrop. He was holding something in one hand. A radio. He lifted it to his mouth and spoke. Ethan couldn't hear the words, but the man looked directly at him as he did. Then Ethan's own satellite communicator began to vibrate. He looked down. The screen showed an incoming transmission. "You and nothing nor device," Maya whispered. "That's impossible." Ethan answered the call. Static filled his earpiece. Then a voice spoke. Old, dry, almost gentle. "You shouldn't have crossed the fence." Ethan stared at the darkness. "Who are you?" "Science." Then the voice said, "You're standing on my roof." The transmission ended. Maya looked at the ground beneath them. Ethan understood before she did. The ledge wasn't natural. It was the top of one of the buried structures. The entire ridge was honeycombed with tunnels. The forest floor was not solid ground. It was a ceiling, and they were standing directly above a man who had spent decades building a hidden world beneath it. Something moved below them. A dull metallic impact, then another. The rock shifted beneath Ethan's boot. He grabbed Maya's wrist. "Don't move." Too late. A crack ran through the ledge between them. Maya's foot slipped. Ethan caught her. The rock broke again. Their bodies slammed against the cliff. Ethan felt the webbing tear at his shoulder. Maya screamed once. The ledge gave way. They fell together into darkness. Ethan's hand locked around Maya's wrist, and the last thing he saw before the world disappeared was the old man standing above them, looking down without expression as the ground swallowed them whole. Ethan's hand was still locked around Maya's wrist when the ledge disappeared beneath them, and for one suspended fraction of a second, there was no up or down, no forest, no cliff. No sound except the violent rush of air past his ears and Maya's breath tearing out of her chest. Then the webbing around his shoulder snapped tight, and his body slammed sideways against something hard enough to drive the breath from him. He did not let go. He felt Maya's fingers wrench against his grip, heard her make a strangled sound, and then both of them dropped another few feet before the climbing webbing caught again. Ethan swung against the rock face, boots searching for purchase, shoulder burning, wrist screaming beneath Maya's weight. "Hold on," he gasped. "I'm holding." Her voice came from somewhere below him. He could barely see her in the darkness. His headlamp had been knocked sideways, throwing a weak beam across wet timber and black earth. He looked up. The opening above them was maybe 15 feet away. A jagged rectangle of night sky framed by broken roots. The old man was gone. Ethan pulled Maya upward inch by inch until her boot found a timber brace. "There," he whispered. "Push." She pushed. He pulled. Together they reached a narrow wooden platform built into the shaft wall. Ethan rolled onto it and immediately grabbed Maya by the shoulders, checking her face, neck, chest, arms, legs. "Anything broken?" "Left ankle." "Can you move it?" "Yes." "Pain?" "Bad." "Numbness?" "No." "Then we work." She nodded, breathing hard. Ethan looked around. The shaft was not a natural fissure. It was a vertical access chamber reinforced with enormous beams darkened by age. At the bottom, 15 feet below, was another floor. A ladder had once been attached to the wall, but most of it had been removed. The chamber extended sideways through a low tunnel. Their fall had not been an accident. The ledge had been designed to collapse. The man had built the entire structure to make people fall exactly here. Ethan pulled his knife and cut away the damaged webbing. His satellite communicator was still attached to his vest, but its screen was cracked. He tried the emergency beacon anyway. No response. Maya checked her GPS. "Still works." "Good." "Ethan." She pointed down the tunnel. His thermal monocular showed a warm shape moving somewhere beyond the bend. One human signature. Then it vanished. He's below us, Maya whispered. Maybe. You know, that's him. Ethan didn't answer. He had learned long ago that certainty was dangerous in survival situations. The unknown was bad enough without giving it a face. He switched the thermal to scan mode and watched. Nothing. He looked at the shaft walls. The timber supports were old, but some bolts were bright and clean. Recent work. The structure had been maintained. Someone had been living down here. Someone had access to the entire sector without ever needing to walk above ground. We need to get out, Maya said. Yes. Up? Ethan looked at the broken ledge. Not that way. Down? Maybe. She stared at him. You just said at him. You just said we need to get out. The only other exit may be through the tunnel. And if he wants us to go there, then we don't give him the route he expects. Ethan studied the shaft. There was another possibility. The old ladder mounts suggested an emergency access route farther down. If the tunnel network connected to multiple exits, they might be able to find one that led outside. Their problem was not merely the man. It was the terrain. They were injured, isolated, and underground, with limited light and no reliable communication. Ethan checked his watch. 1:31 a.m. They had been inside the restricted sector for barely 7 hours. It felt like days. We go down, he said. Maya swallowed. Okay. Ethan secured a length of webbing around the timber brace and lowered himself to the floor. He tested every beam before putting weight on it. The bottom was packed dirt, damp but solid. Maya descended after him. When she reached the floor, she immediately crouched and examined the ground. Footprints. Ethan looked. Several sets, all from the same boot pattern. The impressions were deep, recent, and traveled toward the tunnel. There were no prints going the other direction. He expects us to follow, Maya said. Maybe. You keep saying maybe. Because if I say what I'm thinking, we'll start making decisions based on fear. She gave him a tired look. What are you thinking? Ethan stared at the tunnel. That this guy has done this before. They moved toward the opening. The tunnel was approximately 4 feet high and 3 feet wide, reinforced with timber every 6 feet. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air smelled of wet soil and old smoke. Ethan moved slowly. Thermal monocular raised. Maya followed, favoring her injured ankle. Every 30 feet they stopped and listened. The silence underground was worse than the silence outside. There was no wind, no rain, no distant wildlife. Their own breathing seemed enormous. After 50 yards, the tunnel split. One branch went left and sloped downward. The other continued straight. Ethan checked to the ground. The footprints went straight. He looked at Maya. Left. She almost laughed. Seriously? Yes. Because the footprints go straight. Exactly. They turned left. The tunnel narrowed. At one point, Ethan had to crawl. The floor was wet enough to soak his sleeves. Maya's breathing became strained. Stop. Ethan turned. What? Listen. He did. A faint rhythmic sound came from behind them. Tap, 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 tap. Then silence. Tap, tap, tap. Water? Maya asked. No. Metal. Metal, Maya asked. No. Metal, matey. They waited. The tapping came again. Closer. Ethan killed the headlamps. Total darkness swallowed him. He raised the thermal. Nothing. The tunnel behind them was cold. No human signature. Move, he whispered. They crawled faster. The tunnel ended at a steel door. It had no handle on their side. Ethan examined the edges. Locked from the other side, Maya leaned against the wall. Then were trapped. Ethan shook his head. Not necessarily. He studied the door. It was old military hardware, thick but heavily rusted. A ventilation grate sat above it. Ethan removed his knife and pried at the grate. The screws were loose. After 2 minutes, he had it open. Behind the grate was a narrow vertical shaft. Air moved through it. Cold air. Outside air. "There," he whispered. "Can you fit?" Maya looked. "Maybe." Ethan climbed first, pulling himself through the shaft. It was barely 18 inches wide. He crawled upward for several yards until he saw faint moonlight. The shaft ended behind a cluster of rocks on the surface. Ethan pushed aside leaves and looked out. Forest. No man. No movement. He lowered himself and helped Maya climb. She emerged beside him, covered in mud, breathing hard. Ethan immediately checked the thermal. Nothing nearby. They had escaped the underground system. For the first time in hours, the forest felt almost welcoming. The sky was beginning to lighten at the horizon, though dawn was still hours away. Ethan checked their position. They had traveled nearly half a mile from where they entered the shaft. Their GPS showed they were east of the ridge. "We can reach the fence from here," Maya said. Ethan calculated the route. "Maybe 2 hours. Then we move." He nodded. They started north. The first 100 yards were uneventful. Then Maya stopped. "Ethan." He turned. She pointed at the ground. There was a line of small metal stakes running through the moss. Not traps, markers. Each one had a tiny number stamped into it. 17, 18, 19, 20. Ethan followed the line with his eyes. It led toward the ridge. "These are his," Maya said. "Probably. They're everywhere." Ethan crouched beside one. The stake was new. The number had been stamped recently. "He maps the tunnels. Or he maps people." Ethan looked at her. "What do you mean?" She pointed at the numbers. "Look at the spacing." Ethan measured mentally. Every stake was approximately 20 yards apart. They weren't marking tunnels, they were marking movement corridors. "This is a hunting grid," he said. Maya nodded. "He's been tracking routes." They moved again, but now Ethan avoided the marked corridor. He chose a route through dense brush, keeping the slope between them and the ridge. At 2007, they heard an engine. Both froze. The sound came from far away, a low mechanical hum. Ethan checked thermal. No vehicle visible. The sound stopped. Then a light appeared between the trees. White, bright, moving slowly. "Someone searching," Maya whispered. Ethan considered the possibilities. Federal patrol? Military security? Another trespasser? The light vanished. Then another appeared from a different direction. 2 lights. "They're hurting us," Ethan said. Maya stared at him. "Toward what?" Ethan scanned the terrain. His answer came when he saw a line of warm signatures ahead. Not people. Equipment. Generators. "There's a facility." They moved toward it carefully. The trees opened onto a clearing approximately 100 yards across. In the center stood a weathered concrete structure almost completely hidden by vegetation. It looked abandoned. A rusted antenna rose from its roof. Several vents protruded from the ground. Ethan studied it with thermal. Warmth came from inside. "That's not abandoned," Maya whispered. The structure had no lights, no visible doors, but there was fresh tire mud near one wall. Ethan found a concealed entrance beneath a sheet of corrugated metal. He lifted it carefully. A stairwell descended. Maya grabbed his arm. "No." "Agreed." "Then why are you looking?" "Because we need information." Information gets people killed when they're already being hunted. Ethan looked at her. So does ignorance. They stayed outside. Ethan used his thermal through a crack in the wall. Several heat signatures inside. Human. At least 3. He counted. 1, 2, 3, then 4. Maya whispered, "There are more people." Ethan lowered the monocular. "Yes, so he's not alone." "No." The realization changed everything. The hermit might not be a lone survivalist. The tunnels might be occupied by a group. Perhaps they were connected to an old military installation. Perhaps the restricted zone existed to hide them. Ethan thought about the warning fence, the missing maps, the deliberately vague closure notices. There were explanations that did not require anything supernatural, but none of them made the immediate problem better. He and Maya were now injured. trapped behind a federal fence, and somewhere inside the forest was a group of people who had been killing trespassers. Ethan made a decision. We head west. Back to the fence? Yes. What about the facility? Not our problem. They began moving. At 2:44, Maya stumbled. Ethan caught her. Ankle worse? Yes. We need to slow down. No. Maya, if we slow down, they catch us. She was right. They moved as fast as her injury allowed. Ethan periodically checked thermal. Nothing followed. That was almost worse. At 3:11, they reached a steep ravine. Across the ravine was a narrow ridge leading directly toward the fence. Ethan steadied the descent. We can cross. Maya looked at the slope. How? Rope. They anchored their remaining webbing around a tree and lowered themselves. Ethan went first. The ravine was filled with deadfall and slick rock. He reached the bottom and signaled Maya. She began descending. Halfway down, her foot slipped. Ethan grabbed the rope. Stop. She froze. He pulled her against the slope. Then they heard something above them. A voice. Ethan. His blood went cold. It was the old man's voice. He was standing at the top of the ravine. You keep choosing the wrong direction. Ethan looked up. The man was alone. No weapon visible. He stood with his hands at his sides. Stay where you are, Ethan shouted. The man smiled. You think this is a negotiation, Mela whispered. Don't engage. Ethan knew she was right. He began lowering her. The man didn't move. Then a second figure appeared behind him. Then a third, all wearing dark clothing. Ethan's stomach tightened. They had been surrounded. The first man spoke again. The fence is not for keeping you out. He looked at the forest around them. It's for keeping us in. Ethan stopped. Who are you? The man smiled. The last people who remember what this place was. Then, he raised one hand. Somewhere beneath Ethan's boots, a mechanism clicked. Maya looked down. Ethan looked down. The ravine floor was covered with hundreds of thin wires. They had been walking across them without knowing. The man lowered his hand. Run, he said softly, if you want to live. Ethan understood the cruelty of the instruction immediately. Running was exactly what the trap required. He grabbed Maya and pulled her sideways instead, searching for a route through the wires. The figures above began descending. Ethan's thermal monocular showed more signatures appearing on both sides of the ravine. 5, 6, 7. They weren't chasing. They were closing a net. Ethan looked at Maya. We go down. There's no exit. There is. He pointed toward a dark opening beneath the far wall. A tunnel. The same tunnel network. Maya stared at it. That's where they want us. Ethan nodded. I know. Then why? Because everything else is trapped. He pulled the webbing free. We choose the trap we understand. They crossed the ravine one careful step at a time. Ethan used his knife to cut wires as they moved. Twice, mechanisms clicked beneath the soil. Once a blade swung from a tree and missed Maya by inches. At the tunnel entrance, Ethan stopped. He looked back. The old man stood on the ridge above them, watching. Then he did something Ethan had not expected. He stepped aside. The others stepped aside too. They were giving him a path. Ethan understood. The tunnel was not merely an exit. It was the destination. There was something inside it they wanted Ethan and Maya to reach. He turned to Maya. Whatever happens, stay behind me. No, Maya, we don't split. Fine. They entered. The tunnel immediately descended. The air became colder. Their lights revealed scratches on the walls. Some were old. Some were fresh. At 30 yards, they passed a room containing empty metal cages. At 40 yards, they passed another room filled with maps. The maps covered every wall. Trails, ravines, campsites, roads, fence lines, dates, names. Ethan saw photographs pinned beneath the maps. people, hikers, surveyors, hunters, contractors, missing person photographs. Some were decades old, some were recent. Maya stopped. These people were reported missing. Ethan stared at the photographs. Yes, how many? Too many. One photograph caught his attention. It was a man standing beside a survey truck. Ethan recognized him. That's the guy who hired us. Maya turned. What? Ethan pointed. The private mapping project wasn't independent. The photograph showed their client's father, taken 28 years earlier. On the wall beside it was a map of Black Ridge. Red lines connected dozens of locations. One line ended exactly where Ethan and Maya had entered the forest. Another ended at the concrete facility, and another ended beneath the federal fence. Ethan felt a coldness that had nothing to do with the air. This wasn't a mapping job, he said. It was a test. Maya stared at him. For what? A speaker crackled overhead. The old man's voice filled the tunnel. For whether you would survive long enough to find the door. Ethan raised his weapon hand instinctively, though he carried no firearm. What door? The speaker hissed. The one beneath Sector 9. Maya looked at Ethan. Sector 9? The old voice continued. You crossed the fence because you believed you were mapping an empty place. You were wrong. You were always wrong. The lights in the tunnel flickered. Then every light went out. Ethan grabbed Maya's arm. Complete darkness. A metallic door slammed shut behind them. Another slammed ahead. They were trapped in a sealed corridor. Ethan raised the thermal monocular. The screen showed 2 human heat signatures. His and Maya's. Nothing else. Then slowly, a third signature appeared directly between them. Ethan stared at the screen. The figure was standing inside the wall. Not behind it. Inside it. He lowered the monocular and looked into the darkness. Nothing. He raised it again. The heat signature remained. Then a hand pressed against the other side of the concrete wall beside Maya's head. The fingers were visible through the thermal display as a bright shape. Maya felt the wall tremble. Ethan grabbed her and pulled her backward. The old man's voice returned, almost whispering now. You wanted to know what Sector 9 was protecting. The hand withdrew. Now you do. A deep mechanical vibration began beneath their feet. The tunnel floor shifted. Ethan felt the concrete move downward. Maya grabbed his vest. Ethan. He braced himself against the wall. The floor dropped another inch. Then another. The entire corridor was becoming an elevator. Somewhere far below them, something enormous began turning, metal grinding against metal after decades of silence. Ethan looked at Maya. She looked back at him. Neither spoke. They both understood the same thing. They had not been hunted into the underground system. They had been delivered to it, and whatever waited below had just been activated.